hand closed around her wrist and yanked. She spun free, hit a chain-link fence, and caught herself. Her belly was swollen. She was 8 months along. Her breath was ragged. The man behind her was not done. She kicked out. He grabbed again. She ran. She had no idea where she was. She didn't know this road, didn't know the stone wall running along the edge of it, or the iron gate hanging open at the far end. She just ran toward it. She pushed through the gap sideways, one arm wrapped under her belly, and didn't stop until the footsteps faded behind her. Her name was Nina. She was 26 years old, 8 months pregnant, and completely alone. She looked up. A mansion sat at the end of that driveway, dark and massive and perfectly still. What was buried inside those walls? Stay with me on this one. 3 days earlier, Nina had been living in an apartment on the south side with a man named Dario. She'd been with him for 2 years. She'd thought at one point that she loved him. Maybe she had. That was before she understood what he was. Dario had been charming at first, quick to laugh, generous in the way that always comes with a price attached. The trouble started small. A raised voice, a hand on her arm too hard, a phone checked without asking. Then it got less small. By the time her pregnancy became visible, it had become something Nina had no good word for. She had a bruise on her collarbone that she'd been explaining away for 4 months. The night she left, she packed a backpack while he was asleep. $63 in her pocket. Money she'd been setting aside in a book he never touched. She walked out at 2 in the morning and didn't look back. She had no family within 1,000 miles. Her mother had moved to the West Coast 3 years ago, and they hadn't spoken since a fight that neither of them had found a way to undo. Her closest friend had relocated for a job. She called the local women's shelter the morning after she left. They told her there was a 3-week wait. She slept in a bus station the first night, head on her backpack, watching the doors. A church let her use a cot in the basement the second night. By the 3rd day she was walking because sitting still felt worse than moving. That's when Dario found her on the street. That's when the hand came around her wrist. That's when she ran. Now here's the thing about Nina. She was not the kind of person who fell apart. She'd grown up with not much and learned early to keep her reactions internal, to see the situation clearly and figure out the next step. That quality had kept her functional through worse things than this. But she was 8 months pregnant, on hour 14 of being on her feet, and she'd had nothing to eat since a gas station granola bar at 9 in the morning. She was past tired. She was past scared. She had moved into a place that felt almost like calm, the way you do when you've run out of options to be anxious about. She looked at the mansion at the end of the driveway and made a simple decision. She would not sleep outside tonight. The house was enormous. 4 stories, pale stone, columns flanking the front door. A circular driveway with a dry stone fountain at its center, cracked at the basin. Every window was dark. The grounds had gone wild. Weeds through the gravel, ivy climbing the south wall, a rusted car sitting up on blocks in the side yard like something gave up on it mid-repair. Nobody had been here in a long time. The house felt that way some places do, not just empty but waiting. Nina knocked at the front door anyway. Habit. She gave it a full minute. Nothing. She tried the handle. Locked. She walked the perimeter, testing each window as she went. The 4th one, on the side of the house facing the dead garden, gave way with a low groan when she pushed. The latch had corroded through. She pulled herself up onto the sill and climbed inside. The air was cold and stale and carried the particular smell of a house left too long. Dust and damp and old wood. A grandfather clock stood in the front hallway with its hands frozen at 2:30. On the staircase wall, a series of framed photographs went up in chronological order. A young couple, then the couple older, then children, then family gatherings, holidays, graduations. A whole life organized and hung, then left behind. Nina found the sitting room. She pulled a dusty sheet off a sofa, turned it clean side up, and sat down. She exhaled. A long, slow exhale that felt like the first real breath she'd taken in 3 days. She didn't know whose house this was. She didn't know the name Caruso. She didn't know that the man who'd owned this property had spent the last years of his life in a federal holding facility waiting for a trial that never came, or that the federal agents who'd cataloged his assets had missed this building entirely. Too far out from the city, too easy to overlook on a long list. She knew none of that. He cleared the dirt with his hands and found a military surplus ammunition box, painted black, sealed with a rubber gasket, waterproof. He'd seen these used as storage containers on base, as dry bags on ships, as emergency caches in field operations. He pulled it out and carried it back to the outbuilding. Inside the box were 4 items. A journal, bound in brown leather, roughly 300 pages, filled front to back in his father's small, careful handwriting. A manila envelope sealed with red wax. A bundle of photographs held together by a rubber band that crumbled when he touched it. And a folded sheet of paper, separate from the rest, sealed inside a plastic zip bag. He opened the folded sheet first. It was a hand-drawn family tree. His own name at the bottom. His mother's name, Margaret, 1 level up. His father's name, Robert, on the same level. But above his father's name, the tree continued in a direction Daniel hadn't expected. His father's name in this chart was listed as Robert Haugen. Born 1941. Oslo, Norway. His father's name had never been Robert Rourke. Or rather, it had been Robert Rourke, but it hadn't always been. Daniel sat with that for a while. He picked up the journal and opened it to the first page. The date was June 1971. The handwriting was his father's, younger and quicker. The first line, "They've asked me to do this one more time. I said yes. I don't know how to say no to them anymore." He read for 3 hours. The journal was not a confession. It wasn't dramatic. It read the way a field log reads, factual, sequential, low on emotion. But the facts added up. His father, Robert Haugen, who became Robert Rourke sometime in the mid-60s, had been recruited by a small unit operating under CIA oversight during the early years of the Cold War. Not as a trained operative, as a facilitator. A cutout, the journal called it. Someone outside the official structure. Someone who could move people and materials without a paper trail. Robert's value was simple. He was Norwegian-born, spoke 4 languages, had no official American status, and had a piece of land nobody else knew about. The island. Between 1966 and 1974, the island had been used as a transit point. People coming out of Eastern Europe, defectors, assets, people who needed to disappear, sometimes came through here before being moved to the mainland. The outbuilding had been a holding space. The cache had been a dead drop for documents the unit didn't want tracked through official channels. Daniel turned the pages slowly. He wasn't looking for the dramatic moments. He was looking for what had changed, what had made his father stop. He found it around page 200. A single entry written faster than the rest. Less careful. M. Found the photographs. She understands now. I told her everything. She wants to report it. I told her she can't. She doesn't understand the difference between then and now. There are people who would not like this conversation to continue. M. was his mother, Margaret Rourke, who died in 1986, when Daniel was 9 years old. Of cardiac failure, the death certificate said. She was 41. Daniel set the journal down on the floor. He picked up the photographs. Most of them were what he expected. People he didn't recognize, locations that looked European, dates written on the back in the 1960s and 70s. Black and white, mostly. A few in early color. Then he got to one near the bottom of the stack. Color photograph. His mother, young, maybe mid-30s, standing on the dock of this island. Smiling. Beside her stood a man Daniel didn't know. A man in his 40s, with his arm partially around her shoulder in what read as comfort or control. He was looking at the camera. She wasn't. On the back, in unfamiliar handwriting, M. Understood. She had to be told. Daniel turned the photograph over again. And again. He set it face down and didn't pick it up for a long time. He needed air. He walked outside and sat on the flat rock, the reference point from the map, and watched the water for a while. The sun was getting low. He got his small camp stove going and heated a pouch of rice and beans from his pack. He ate it slowly. The island was quiet. Just wind and water. Gulls a long way off. His father was a week dead, and here, on this 12-acre piece of Maine coast that he'd never known existed, the man was more present than he'd been in 30 years. Maybe the worst of it was already behind him. Old history. Cold War. A dead woman who had lived and died before Daniel was old enough to know her properly. He rinsed his tin bowl in the freshwater stream and went back inside the outbuilding. He sat with the journal across his knees. He thought, "I'll read more in the morning." He was almost calm. He heard the engine at first light, low and steady, coming from the west. A boat. He crossed to the door of the outbuilding and looked out through the spruce trees toward the dock. A 20-foot aluminum vessel was coming in slow, maybe a quarter-mile out. Daniel moved fast. He put the journal, the photographs, and the sealed envelope back inside the ammunition box and pushed it behind the shelf unit. He pulled the outbuilding door shut behind him as well as the broken hasp would allow, and he walked down toward the dock at an angle that would put the cabin between him and whoever was coming. He was calm. He'd been in situations before where you didn't know what was coming and you needed to control your own reaction time. He'd learned that the only thing you could do was make choices early, before you needed to make them. He took out his phone and started recording. The boat pulled up to the dock. One person aboard. A man, late 60s, short silver hair, broad through the shoulders, moving with the deliberate ease of someone who kept himself in shape. He wore a waxed jacket and rubber-soled boots, and he stepped off the boat with the confidence of someone who had been on this dock before. More than once. He saw Daniel and stopped. Nina set the folder on the desk. And then she saw the envelope. It was sitting on the far side of the desk, not in a folder, just placed there, alone. White paper, sealed with red wax. On the front, in the same handwriting as the notes. Not for anyone. She stared at it for a long moment. She didn't open it. Not yet. She couldn't fully explain why. Maybe because it had been left alone deliberately, maybe because the words stopped her. She set it back exactly where it was. She took the folder. Just the one. She carried it back to the sitting room, set it on the end table, and lay back down on the sofa. The baby moved in 2 slow rolls. Nina pressed her hand flat against her side. She would figure it out in the morning. She was too tired now. She needed to sleep. She pulled the sheet over herself. Closed her eyes. Sleep came fast and deep. The sleep of someone who has finally found a place to stop running, even if it's only for a few hours. She woke to the sound of a car door slamming. She was sitting up before the thought had finished forming. The room was black. Her heart was already fast. A second door slammed. 2 of them. Then footsteps on gravel. Steady. Coming toward the house like they owned it. Nina did not move. Her whole body went still in a way that was less decision than reflex. The baby made no movement at all. As if the 2 of them, 8 months together, had learned to go quiet at the same moment. A key in the lock. The front door opened. A flashlight beam swept the front hallway. She could see it moving under the sitting room door. A slow, methodical arc, like someone taking inventory. 2 male voices, kept low. Check upstairs. Anything that shouldn't be here. What exactly are we looking for? You'll know. Footsteps on the stairs. The second man's light moved down the hallway below. Nina tracked the beam under the door. Dining room. Study. Library. The light slowed. Then she heard the bookshelf move. A pause. Then the younger voice. Hey, someone's been in here. Candle, recently burned. The older man came back downstairs. His light moved under the sitting room door and stopped. A longer pause. Someone's still here. This is where the nature of this changed. Up until that moment, Nina had been thinking about one kind of problem. Tomorrow. Police. What to do with what she'd found. That was manageable. A morning problem. But the words "someone's still here," the flat, certain way they were said, no alarm in them, told her something she needed to hear clearly. These men were not neighbors who'd noticed an open window. They had a key. They had a purpose. They knew exactly what this house contained. And they would not be pleased to find it disturbed by a pregnant stranger with a folder of their secrets pressed to her chest. Nina had run out of situations to underestimate. She moved to the kitchen door and eased through it. Stood against the wall in the dark. The window, the same one she'd used to get in, was above the counter to her left. 4 feet up. She looked at it. She looked at her belly. She made the calculation and started climbing. One arm on the counter. Knee up. Second knee. She got herself onto the counter on all fours, turned sideways, got the window open, got one leg through and lowered herself down. Her feet hit the gravel with a crunch that sounded, in the silence, like a gunshot. She froze. The house stayed quiet. She looked at the folder in her hand. She'd grabbed it without thinking, pure reflex. She looked at the gate at the far end of the driveway. She could go. Walk through that gate. Disappear into the night. The folder alone was enough. More than enough. But she stood there in the cold and thought about the envelope. Not for anyone. Sealed in red wax. Sitting alone on the desk while everything else around it was organized and filed. Someone had separated it from everything else on purpose. She thought about the senator's name in 5 separate folders. She thought about the done column in red ink. She thought about what it meant that this room had existed for 20 years without anyone finding it, and that the men with the key had not come back sooner. They thought it was safe. They'd left it here because they believed it would stay quiet forever. And now here was Nina, in the dark, holding the one thing that made any of this matter. She turned back toward the house. She would never fully be able to explain this decision. Not to her lawyer later, not to her daughter when her daughter was old enough to ask. The best she ever managed was, "I had nothing and those papers were something, and I was done walking away from things." She climbed back through the kitchen window. She moved through the kitchen, through the hall. The light from upstairs was still moving. Both men on the second floor now. She could tell from the footsteps. She crossed the hall fast and silent, pushed through the library, and pressed through the bookshelf door. The room was exactly as she'd left it. She grabbed the sealed envelope from the desk. She grabbed 2 of the ledgers, the first and the last in the sequence. She turned to go. The bookshelf swung open. The older man stood in the gap. Short, gray at the temples, a wool coat too clean for where he was standing. He looked at her belly, at the folder and ledgers and envelope pressed to her chest, and his expression did not change. "Well," he said. His eyes moved to the envelope. "Okay then," he said. "If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss what comes next." "That was a courtesy from your father," Roy said. "A misguided one. The contents are classified." "He's dead," Daniel said. "And I'm his son." He broke the wax seal. Inside were 3 items. A handwritten letter, his father's hand, recent, the ink still dark. A second folded document that turned out to be a signed affidavit, notarized, dated 14 months before his father died. And a single sheet with a typed list of 8 names. Roy Callahan was the 3rd name down. Daniel read the letter first. He read it twice. Then he looked up at Roy. "He named you," Daniel said. "I know what's in that letter. He says you were the one who made the call." Daniel kept his voice steady. The recording on his phone was still running. "My mother went to you directly. She told you she was going to report what my father had been involved in to a congressional oversight committee. She told you his name didn't have to be in it. She just wanted the operation documented. And you told her that wasn't possible. And then you made a call." Roy said nothing. "There were 2 other men," Daniel said. "The affidavit names them too, along with the name of the doctor who changed her prescriptions. My father apparently spent 3 years finding that out. He paused. He found out and he didn't go to the police because you told him what would happen if he did. That was a long time ago, Roy said. My mother was alive then. Roy's jaw moved. She was going to expose a program that protected 23 people. 23 people and their families, who were given new lives because of what that program accomplished. One woman's moral objections, however sincere, were not worth 23 lives. She wasn't offering to expose the people, Daniel said. She was offering to document the operation. There's a difference. And you know there is. In the real world, Roy said, his voice dropping, the line between those two things is very thin. Her name was Margaret, Daniel said. She was 41 years old. She had a 9-year-old son. He stepped forward 1 step. Roy's right hand moved toward his jacket. Daniel had been watching for exactly that. He was across the distance in 2 steps and his left hand caught Roy's wrist before the jacket cleared. Roy was strong for his age and he knew how to use his weight, but Daniel had been trained for close-quarters work in environments that made this gravel shoreline look comfortable, and the struggle lasted approximately 4 seconds before Roy was against the outbuilding wall and the small handgun that had been in his jacket was in Daniel's hand instead. He stepped back. I'm not going to use this on you, Daniel said. He dropped the gun's magazine into the dirt and tossed the frame into the trees. And you know why. Roy straightened himself, anger under his expression but controlled. The face of a man who had been managing his reactions for 50 years. The recording, Roy said. Since you got off the boat. Roy looked at the phone in Daniel's left hand for a long moment. You can't prove anything, Roy said. You can make things uncomfortable. You can make a public complaint. Nothing will come of it. The men on that list are old or dead. The program doesn't exist in any database you have access to. And I have enough distance between myself and 1986 that anything a grieving son says about a classified program will look like exactly what it is. Maybe, Daniel said, but you came out here to stop me, which means the documents exist and you know it and you're worried. He held up the affidavit. My father spent 3 years building this. He didn't do it as therapy. He did it because he intended it to go somewhere. Roy looked at him. Walk away, Daniel said. Get on your boat. Go back to wherever you came from. He paused. And understand that I have already sent copies of what's in this envelope, plus the journal, plus the photographs, plus this recording, to 2 people who are not me. They know what to do with it if something happens to me. That last part wasn't true yet, but it would be within the hour. Roy looked at him a long time. The practiced ease was gone. Under it was something older, a man calculating odds in real time, the way a certain kind of person always does, the way Daniel had learned to recognize in commanders who treated human lives as variables in an equation. Roy Callahan walked to his boat. He didn't say anything else. He started the engine and reversed out from the dock and turned west. He didn't look back. Daniel stood on the dock and watched the boat until it was gone. Then he sat down and his hands were shaking, and he let them shake for a while. That was okay. That was what hands did after something like that. He spent the rest of that day on the island. First thing he did was send everything. He photographed every page of his father's journal with his phone. Photographed the affidavit, the list, the letter. Sent the photos in 3 separate email chains, to his personal lawyer in Portland, to a journalist he'd known from a Navy story 3 years back, and to a friend from his service years, a man named Torres who was now working in federal law and who Daniel knew would understand what he was looking at. He included a note with each one. If you don't hear from me in 48 hours, open it. Then he went back inside the outbuilding and sat down on the floor and read his father's letter again. All the way through this time without interruption. Robert Rourke had written it 14 months before he died. He'd known his health was going. He'd known he was running out of time to do what he should have done in 1986, or in 1979, or in 1971 when he first said yes to people who turned out to have a very different understanding of consequences than he did. The letter was not a dramatic document. It didn't read like a confession. It read like a man talking to his son in the only way he knew how, directly, without apology for the facts, and with apology only for the things he could have changed. He wrote, "I was 24 years old and I believed in what they told me I was doing. That was true when I started. I want you to know it started as something real." He wrote, "Your mother found the photographs in 1979. I told her everything. I thought she would understand because she was always. I was waiting to be in front of a lawyer," Nina said. Carol looked at her steadily. Then she peeled the wax seal and opened it. She read in silence. For pages, both sides. Nina watched her eyes move across the handwriting. Near the end of the last page, Carol's expression shifted once. Not alarm. More like confirmation. When she set it down, she was quiet for a moment. "This is a confession," she said. "Handwritten by Vittorio Caruso, addressed to his daughter. He names a sitting state senator. He names 2 federal contractors and a city official. He provides specific dates, amounts, and actions taken in exchange for payment." She paused. "He also identifies the private account through which the payments were routed, which means every line of this is verifiable against bank records." Nina said, "The man at the house. He told me the people named in that letter will find me eventually." "He's right," Carol said, "which means we need to move faster than they will." She picked up her phone. "I'm calling a colleague who handles federal whistleblower protections. Tonight." She looked at Nina directly. "Are you ready for this to become your life for a while?" "My life wasn't working anyway," Nina said. Carol made the call. What followed took 8 months. That part is less dramatic than one night in an abandoned mansion. But in some ways it was harder. Depositions. Document verification. A 2-week period when an attorney for the Senator's Political Action Committee sent a letter to Carol's office using language designed to intimidate. Carol framed it and hung it on her wall. Nina testified before a grand jury at 7 months postpartum, her daughter asleep in a carrier on her chest. The judge asked if she'd like to step out. Nina said no. The senator resigned 15 months after that night in the mansion, citing health reasons. Nobody believed the health reason. His resignation statement was 4 sentences and named nothing specific, which told you everything about who had advised him. 2 of the other names in the confession faced federal investigations. One entered a cooperation agreement. The shell company network that had been running quietly for over 2 decades was taken apart transaction by transaction over the following year. Sal Bertone was interviewed twice. Both times he answered with the precision of a man who had spent his life choosing his words carefully. He gave investigators exactly as much as they were going to get from him regardless, which, as it turned out, was enough. Nina never saw him again. But about a year later, she found a plain envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single index card. 2 words, in the same careful handwriting she'd seen in the hidden room. "Well done." She kept it. Her daughter was born 6 weeks after that night in the mansion. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Nina named her Lucia. She hadn't decided on the name in advance. She'd been going back and forth between 3 choices and none of them had settled. The morning after the birth, still in the hospital bed, she was scrolling her phone and came across a photograph she'd taken of the staircase wall in the mansion. The framed photographs, the whole family arranged in chronological order. She zoomed into a label at the bottom corner of one frame. Lucia Caruso, 1974. Vittorio's mother. The woman who had built that house before any of it began. Nina stared at the photo for a long time. She doesn't say it was a sign. She's careful about that. But she didn't change the name. The mansion was acquired through the asset resolution process and transferred to a nonprofit 2 years later. It was converted into a transitional housing facility for women and families. The circular driveway was repaved. The fountain was cleared but never made to run. It seemed right to leave it as it was. The iron gate at the entrance was repaired. New hinges, solid and properly seated. But Nina kept a photograph of the old one. The broken hinge, the gap she'd squeezed through sideways in the dark with one arm wrapped under her belly and nowhere to go. Some things break at exactly the right moment.